Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Dennis Spooner, the Chairman of the Planning Committee, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the committee. May I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated, and members of the Democratic Services team will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Is anybody recording? No? Okay, thank you. I'd also like to advise members that they should only address the meeting by way of their microphones, and to remind them to turn their microphones off when they have finished speaking. Item number 1 on the agenda. Apologies for absence. I can see we're all here apart from Councillor Holmes, who I'm told is on his way. Don't think there are any other apologies. Thank you. Item 2, substitute members. There are no substitute members of which I've been told of. Visiting members. We have one visiting member. You tell us which items you're here for, please, Councillor Mumford.
Councillor Steve Mumford, Bookman, Chelsea and Chertsey, and I wish to speak on agenda item 15 and 16. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Right, item 4 on the agenda, withdrawn items. There are no items that have been withdrawn. Item 5, adjourned meeting. This will be next week, Thursday, 25th of January, but I don't anticipate we'll be having to use it. Item 6, urgent items. I intend to take any verbal updates as urgent items as they contain further information relating to matters to be considered at this meeting. Is that agreed? Thank you, members. Item number 7, disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members? No, thank you. Disclosures by officers? Thank you. Disclosures of lobbying? Yes, I will go clockwise, Councillor Cox. Yes, Councillor Cox.
Item 16, that's all.
Good. Councillor Gooch.
Item 16.
Councillor Wilkinson.
16.
Councillor Jeffrey.
16.
Councillor English. Councillor Harwood.
Item 16.
Comments.
16.
Has anybody not been lobbied on? All right, okay. In that case, we carry on as we were. Councillor McKenna.
Just 16.
Councillor Reardon.
16.
And Councillor 16, Councillor Russell. Okay.
Item 16.
Yeah, I have also been lobbied on item 16, but Councillor Perry has not. Item number 9, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I move that all the items on the agenda be taken in public as proposed. Is that agreed? Thank you, members. Item number 10, minutes of our meeting held on the 14th of December 2023. I move that the minutes of the meeting be approved as a correct record and signed. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item number 11, presentation of petitions. There are none this evening. Item number 12, deferred items, which is on page 5 of your agenda. I'll ask Mr. Jarman to explain what's happening on those.
Negotiations are continuing, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. We rush on to what should be item 14, but I noticed that you're here. Right, sorry, you weren't when I last looked round. Before we take this further, does anybody wish to speak against the officer's recommendation on this application? In that case, I'm quite happy to propose from the chair that we approve the application. as on the order papers. Is that seconded by you, Councillor?
Sorry,
Weekend?
Mr. Chairman, you need to ask the applicant whether they're
I
willing
know,
to.
I'm just about to do that, Councillor English. Thank you for pointing that out. Right, Mr. Hicks, you do have a right to speak, but as you just heard, I'm going to propose that we approve the application as per the order papers. It's been seconded. I'm now going to put it to the vote, and then permission hopefully will be granted. Do you waive your right to speak? Okay. Okay, I'll ask all members to vote to approve the application. I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Thank you very much, Mr. Hicks, for coming along. you can now go straight to the pub. You can... Right, we now move on to item 13 on the agenda, which is 3 Woodlands, Boxley, Kent. It's obviously Kent, isn't it? It's in Maidstone. Right, okay. Ms. Chaplin, would you like to give us your report, please? Thank you.
Good evening, members. This proposal is a part retrospective proposal for hard and soft landscaping works, including alterations to site levels and installation of retaining walls at number 3 Woodlands. It's located, it's a dwelling, large detached dwelling dating from the 19th. Ancient woodland is located on this green area here, along with local wildlife site, and the site itself has a TPO covering it. 2 trees have been removed from the site without TPO consent. Works to level the garden have taken place together with the retaining walls to divide the garden into 2 terraces. This has exposed some of the land to the chalk base. Works have stopped after enforcement involvement, and this application is the result of proactive engagement between the application and enforcement officers. The steep embankment shown on the sections with the steepest slopes are to the rear and to the south. You'll see here, this is the rear section rising to the top, and here is the ancient woodland going down to here, and then you've got the other 2 sections, one across the side of the garden here and one across the front part of the site. So you're getting an appreciation of the way the site levels change. The terraces are constructed to make use, sort of 2 usable areas of level garden for use by the applicant, retaining the height and the boundary treatment along the rear southern boundaries. The landscape plan seeks to try and comprehensively address the issues of the 2 replacement trees and provide a wider planting scheme and biodiversity measures to the site. The landscape officer is now satisfied with the amendments to the scheme. It also includes biodiversity measures and garden-based proposals, and also measures for biodiversity to the existing dwelling. The site is within the urban boundary of Walderslade, but it is a well-landscaped street. The front of the sites are characterised by soft boundaries, with the woodland on the higher rear elevation provides the backdrop. You can see here the type of landscaping that's now proposed along the retaining walls. There's a very vast array of landscaping proposed, but I won't go into detail. It is all set out in a very detailed manner by the case officer within the report of the type of planting, the spacing, etc. You'll see here, these are the retaining walls here, 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 and then one here. The proposal is considered to have responded to the landscape officer's request to soften these retaining walls and to integrate them into the site and the surroundings. Several new areas of lawn are proposed here, 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 around here, and here. A hedgerow is also proposed along the front of the site in place of there was a previous application for new walling and gates that were refused. This hedgerow is a result of negotiation and discussion with the landscape officer and the case officer to produce a more softened, sensitive landscape approach and a positive enhancement to the streets theme. If we move on to the photos, this is a photo that was taken at a time when the works have just stopped, so there is no landscaping yet in place. They are awaiting the results of this application. So you can see where the retaining walls are, all this area needs to be re-landscaped. We have also, not only are we putting on landscaping conditions, we put on a detailed topsoil condition to ensure the appropriate mix of planting substances put back, and that any landscaping then has a good chance of survival. And also we're recommending a 10-year landscaping condition on this to ensure everything takes, and that we've got time to ensure that the landscaping can be enforced. This shows the site from the outer areas. So you can see the footpath to the east. This is a view of the inner boundary. All this land has been retained and the surrounding boundaries to the site. This is the hoarding that's surrounding the site, which has been because the dwelling has been unoccupied and had works undertaken. So this would be removed. This is from the front of the site across the opposite side of the road. So you can see the verdant nature of this street scene, and then the hedgerow would be going in place of that hoarding. As I've said, I think we are recommending that permission be granted, but subject to the detailed conditions we have suggested. With the site being well screened from the road, we feel that the proposal is now in keeping with the surrounding areas, what would be expected. To a certain extent, you expect people to renovate their gardens. This has been an intensive scheme, but we feel that this scheme has now made efforts to restore the site and hopefully get all the planting in place within a set time period of which those conditions are seeking to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chaplin. We have two public speakers. We have somebody from Boxing Parish Council and somebody representing the applicant. Could I ask the representative of Boxing Parish Council, Councillor Mays, to come forward? I don't know whether you've been here before, but if you press the middle button, it will turn red and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members, planning officers. Thank you for the opportunity to present the parish's case. I personally have lived in Walderslade since 1963, of which I've witnessed much development of the woodland areas, some good, some not so good. Just to offer a little bit of history, here in this particular area in the past of woodlands was a cob tree small farm. It was a cob nut farm. It was cleared in the First World War to supply pit props, and over the last 100 years or so, it's developed into a fairly nice community woodland area where many people enjoy the walk. Regarding this planning permission for number 3 woodlands, the parish strongly objects to the application on the following grounds. In our opinion, the application has desecrated the site after planning applications had been previously refused, and I understand that they're still subject to Maidstone Borough Council enforcement team's investigation. We've not seen the results of that yet for unauthorised work. In our opinion, to grant permission before the investigation's been completed would be wrong and set the wrong precedents for other people. In our opinion, as the Parish Council Committee, this is over-urbanised development on this site, which primarily is woodland community. The surrounding houses are woodland. If the Planning Committee agree this development, and we feel that you will be sending the wrong message to the community. In our opinion, you'll be saying, don't worry about planning permission, let's just remove the woodland, let's just carry on, no one has stopped me. It will just be, I can always keep applying, and eventually the Planning Council will give the permission. as they seem to in this case. It's been refused several times and yet it's still going ahead. We feel that's the message that you will send if you agree to this planning. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Mays. Thank you, and well within your 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Right, Mr. Cooley for the applicant. Once again, if you press the middle button, it'll turn red.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Just to address a few points there. The enforcement action is open, of course, but this engagement, this process we've been through is part of the engagement with the enforcement team, and they're satisfied with what we've presented. Is acceptable. Just also to make the point that the applicant hasn't removed woodland. He removed grass at the back of his property and chalk. So there's no woodland on his property at that point. And most of the garden wouldn't be visible from the public realm, the terracing at the back. Just a brief history, the existing house, the existing garden on his house was very steep. It sloped right down to the property, and it wasn't very useful as a garden. So the applicant undertook work to terrace the garden and make it a useful amenity space. When he began the work, he believed that it was a private garden, that there was no planning restrictions that would limit the work, but he was obviously made aware of the fact that it was considered development by the enforcement team. So he immediately stopped work and engaged with the council, and we had a pre-application meeting on site with the case officer and the tree officer. The main concern seemed to be the potential impact on the woodlands behind, but at the time, it looked pretty, as you can see on the photos, there's bare block wall of terraces. But it was established actually there was no harm to the woodlands caused by those excavations because the ground was chalk and therefore the roots of the trees were quite shallow and quite high in the ground, not extending into the property at all. So there's no harm caused to the woodlands by the excavations at all. The subsequent treatment and design of the landscaping works was undertaken by a specialist landscape designer who, when preparing his design, addressed the points raised by the council. The final design meets all the requirements to create a satisfactory and well-considered landscape design that frames the house well. There was a planning application that was refused for a high wall to the front of the site. The application was refused and the applicant understands the reasons for that. And now, of course, has no intention to build the wall there. For privacy and security, a hedge is planned along the boundary of the property. There's been some concerns raised about the height of the hedge. There are landscaping conditions that will be imposed on it, 10-year landscaping conditions, and we could accept a condition to limit the height of that hedge if it was deemed a requirement, although obviously difficult to enforce, but we could accept that. And having a hedge along the front will retain the verdant nature of the site and will screen the private garden from the public realm anyway. So that's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cooley. I'd just like to ask Mr. Jarman to say something first before I open it up to members.
Not to comment on the merits of this proposal, but just to contextualise this from a legal perspective. As councillors are aware, so this is just a reminder, planning law is a branch of administrative law. It's not criminal law. So obviously under criminal law, if you commit an offence, perhaps a poor example, if you're doing 80 miles an hour on a motorway, then that's a criminal offence because you're 10 miles over the speed limit. So it's very binary, whereas planning is administrative. So discretion is fundamental to planning law. So that's why enforcement officers, by law, don't go around prosecuting people. There's an element of discretion, and one can disagree with the proposal. Of course, one can, but it is not a binary matter of taking stances and being tough on things. Each case on its own merits, and any enforcement action has to be proportional. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. Right, Councillor English, and then I had Councillor Russell, Councillor Kimmins and Councillor Harwood, or was it Harwood before Kimmins?
It is quite hard to see Councillor Kimmins past Councillor Harwood.
I know.
Oh.
I know.
Sorry.
Right, Councillor English, the floor is yours.
As Mr. Jarman said, planning law is a branch of administrative law, and one of those principles of this particular branch of administrative law is that although we as local authorities, including parish councils, are most exercised about it, the government has not yet seen fit to make it an offence or to prevent retrospective planning applications from coming forward. People are allowed to put in retrospective planning applications. Secondly, we do indeed sometimes prosecute people for breach of planning regulations, but that is somewhat far down the process. What planning enforcement seeks to do is to regularise those things that can be regularised. And it is not the case, as the parish council says, that the decision is being made before the enforcement process was carried out. The enforcement process has directly led to the planning application coming forward. So it has, shall we say, reached that point. If the committee was so minded to refuse the application, no doubt the enforcement process would kick in again. However, one cannot turn down an application simply because it is retrospective or because there has been an ongoing enforcement case which has reached, at least potentially, a resolution. That is not grounds for a refusal. And as the parish council says, one must be mindful of sending out messages. A message the borough council must send out, regardless of the risk of an appeal, is that we must follow the law and the procedures as a public authority and not put in our subjective feelings about how annoying such procedures can often be. We have to follow the rules, and the rules say that you are allowed to do this. And we need, therefore, for the parish council or any objectors to put forward reasons why, in planning terms, this is an unacceptable application. All of the arguments put forward have been about process other than the height of the hedge, which is the conditionable issue. I have not heard a planning reason for refusal. If people wish to refuse this application around this table, we need to hear such a reason, and I've not heard one.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just really, excuse me, sympathetic to what the local residents were saying, that the blue hoarding's been an eyesore for over 2 years. And cognizant of that, I was just looking at condition 2, where it says the landscape scheme shall be carried out during the first planting season, October to February, following the date of this decision. I mean, it's freezing cold in the ground at the moment anyway. It's the only thing stopping the mud currently. So I just wondered, would there be any way of changing that so that they could start on it now? It seems a shame to have to wait till the next planting season, because you could get the hoarding down and get it growing. I think this planting season is going to go on a bit longer because it's cold at the moment. So we could definitely get an improvement to what's obviously been an eyesore for over 2 years.
We could extend the planting season within the wording of the condition to say October to March, say end of March. The trouble is, if I allow a second planting season, it's giving longer time for the works to remain uncompleted. So I can provide longer time for the planting, but I wouldn't suggest going into a second planting season.
I think what I was meaning is we're in January. Yeah, I know it's going to start October to February, but as in, could it start, as it says, following this decision? They don't have to wait till October. It can start in February, March, like right now, kind of thing.
Yeah, we're currently in the planting season, so I mean, so if it was granted tonight, we're in the planting season, so they'd have at the moment from now to the end of February. I'm suggesting now until the end of March. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the planting season normally goes on till the end of March, and sometimes beyond that. It depends what the weather's like. Okay, does that satisfies you? Yeah. Okay, so it's Councillor Holt and then Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chairman. I can understand why local residents were a little bit anxious about this application, because the change to that slope was quite profound, and there are some significant retaining wall structures now, and I think the reason why that was interpreted as being so jarring is, as you probably saw from the photographs, that part of Boxley Road, it's really quite organic and kind of soft vegetated slope set into woodland, and to suddenly impose lots of red brick wall and to cut the bank away has made a real kind of change to the streetscape. That said, I think that the landscape, I mean, I obviously prefer there to be more native species, but I think the landscaping scheme that is proposed is okay, particularly the native elements. I mean, it's quite interesting that there's been a little bit of a kind of debate around the height of the hedge. I mean, from my mind, and having looked at it, I want the hedge to cover up the wall, basically. So when people were talking about the height of the hedge, I was thinking, well, about 1.5 meters might be about right to soften that really long wall. And it's vegetated in front of it anyway, as you can see from the pictures around some of the stumps. So I do wonder whether we should give delegated powers to the landscape officer or to the case officer to just work out the most appropriate scale of that hedgerow to do its job, because we've seen quite a few hedges that we put in, they get whacked down every year to about 1 foot tall, and they have no impact or value at all. Whereas in this case, it is to soften the impact of a very long, very tall retaining wall. So we, I think, need to consider that. And just on the point around when the plants go into the ground, I mean, the general rule is that the earlier in the planting season they go in, the more likely they are to succeed. It's always best when the ground is getting colder rather than the ground is getting warmer, if you like, when trees and shrubs go into the ground. And it's quite a tough neighbourhood because this is just chalk. So it's going to need quite a lot of preparation, cutting into what is essentially, stone to plant the hedgerows and the other landscaping that goes in. So I think it's better to get it right rather than to rush it, if that makes sense. By the time all the paperwork is done and everything, we're going to be cutting it fine. And we seem to have this thing about having kind of droughts now in the spring. It's probably, and we've seen a very dry period since Christmas, because we're in El Nino year. So I don't know. I just think it should be led by the landscape officer in terms of the best way to get this to work. But aside from that, I'm happy to move that we grant permission as per the papers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holman. Councillor Kimmett?
Yes, I am seconded.
Okay, seconded. Councillor Jeffrey? Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, as I am the seconder, I'm allowed to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to agree with everything what Councillor English said about the parish council have not brought any letter and law for us to actually refuse it. So I'm looking at, that's why I've supported it. And also what Councillor Harwood said about, why worry about the size of the hedge? The bigger the hedge, the better. It's gonna cover up a big red brick wall, unless they actually dig out the flint that comes along with the chalk and then build it out of flint. It still needs covering up. So the bigger the better.
Thank you, Councillor Kimmett. Councillor Jeffrey, I'm sorry, Councillor Kimmett's interrupted you, but there we are. So
it's all right, no problem at all. Yeah, on my first reading of this, I was kind of taken aback by the amount of concrete that it looked like, given the verdant nature of the street. But I'm pleased with the conditions that have been put forward, particularly the hard surfacing materials being permeable. I just wanted to draw your attention. I noticed it's been proposed per the papers, but the recommendation in the papers just says approval. It doesn't say with conditions. So could we approve with conditions rather than just approve?
Shall I jump in? Yeah. Paragraph section 8 recommendation grant, it's right on the bottom of the page, so that's probably why you've turned to the conditions, and it's right on the end. It does say grant planning permission subject to the following conditions, and then moves on to the list of conditions. I can obviously after discussion, I can have a quick discussion with the landscape officer, and if you're willing to give delegated powers for the officers to tweak the conditions, I can suggest that we look at the planting season either to the end of this March, or we give them an extra planting season if councillors feel that's acceptable, because obviously the site will then remain bare for a longer period, but it would be until October of this year. But if you feel that gives the planting better chance of success, but I have also imposed the 10-year landscaping condition and the topsoil requirement. So I'm happy to tweak the conditions to address that, to either give them more time, subject to what councillors feel. I would also request the delegated powers to tweak a plan reference number on condition 1. It's been altered due to a change in an annotation on the written annotation on the plan. Just a spelling error, so I'll be altering 1 from revision A to revision B, and I'll leave that in your hands now.
Yeah, sorry to come back. I think, like Diane said, 10 years and getting a greater height is all fine, but I would like to see the planting take place by the end of March. It's not rocket science doing this. And I'm worried that, there's a failure in the next planting season and everything's sort of kicked down the road. So I don't see any good reason why it can't be done now.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the other point that we want the landscape officer to get involved in is not just the making sure that the planting goes in at the right time and takes place appropriately. It's also the appropriate scale, how it should be maintained in terms of the width and height to have because this is mitigation for landscape harm in a very desirable landscape. So I think the landscape officer really does need to be quite prescriptive in stating the management maintenance going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. So are members all aware now it's been proposed to be approved subject to the tweaking which Miss Chaplin just said. Votes in favour? I think that is unanimous, members. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Councillor May and for Mr. Cooney for coming along this evening. You can stay for the rest of the meeting if you like, but I'm sure you'd rather go off. Right, we now move on to item 16 on the agenda, land at Lewis Court, Green Lane, Bolton, Monchelsea, and call upon Mr. Fletcher to give us his report.
Thank you. So it's now in Bolton, Monchelsea, and the application seeks the erection of 1 3-bedroom dwelling and 1 4-bedroom dwelling with associated access, parking and landscaping. The application site relates to an area of land located to the east of Grade 2 listed building Lewis Court, which is understood to date from the early 16th century and is a typical Wilden Hall house. Tudor Cottage, also Grade 2 listed, is located to the north of the site. And to the far west of the site, there is another Grade 2 listed building, White Cottage. The site is relatively flat and enclosed by existing and well-established planting. The land is currently associated to Lewis Court, and the existing access to and from the site is from Green Lane to the west of the application site. For the purposes of the adopted local plan, the proposal site is within the defined village of Bilton-on-Chelsea. Just run through some of the site photos. There's the access. View looking eastwards. Looking towards Tudor Cottage. Looking westwards from the site access. At the eastern elevation of Lewis Court. And looking towards the northeastern boundaries. And looking towards the southern boundary, the site of the access on the left. So in terms of the design and appearance of the new dwellings, the steeply pitched roofs, the cat-side roof elements, timber barge boards, and the external chimney features complement the surrounding historic buildings. And the use of high-quality materials, including ragstone, timber weatherboarding, and sash windows, multi-stock brick and clay, and/or natural slate roof tiles will ensure a high-quality finish to the development. The materials are appropriate to the area, and we will secure those through conditions. So we have assessed that the development is acceptable in terms of its scale and design, and the layout is acceptable to the pattern of development within the area. The Council's Conservation Officer raises no objection to the application on heritage grounds. With the Specialist Conservation Officer advice considered, it is agreed that the proposal would cause less than substantial harm to the significance of the surrounding listed buildings. So with reference to the NPPF, this needs to be weighed up against the public benefits of the proposal, which in this case is providing the new dwellings and the economic benefits from the construction and the economic benefits from new residents in the area. So given the proposal's layout and the separation distances involved, the new dwellings would not have an unacceptable impact upon any neighbour when trying to enjoy their own property, both internally and externally, in terms of light, outlook, and overbearing. This assessment includes those properties yet to be built to the immediate south of the application site, which is these dwellings here. The general comings and goings associated to two new dwellings is also unlikely to have an adverse impact upon the amenity of any neighbour when they are trying to enjoy their own property. In terms of general noise and disturbance, acceptable levels of privacy at ground floor level can be secured for the use of appropriate boundary treatments that we can condition. The parking provision accords with local plan policies, with the shown car barn considered to be in good design and vehicles are able to turn and leave the site in forward gear. In terms of refuse collection, the agent has confirmed that this will be the same for the new dwellings already approved in the proximity of the proposal site. The condition will be imposed to secure appropriate bicycle storage for each plot. In terms of biodiversity on site, on the basis of the specialist advice, it is accepted that the submission has demonstrated that the protected species would not be adversely impacted upon as a result of the proposed development, subject to the imposition of relevant conditions. The proposal would therefore be in accordance with local plan policies DM1 and DM3 in ecological terms. There's no consultancy objections to the application. The application is assessed as being in accordance with local and neighbourhood and national planning policies and is recommended for approval subject to conditions as detailed in the officer report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. We have 4 speakers altogether. We have an objector first. I think the name is Dar Sumner, and he or she is with us virtually. Are you on the? Oh, you've actually. Oh, right. So I've got down here that you're going to appear virtually, but never mind. Okay, you have 3 minutes from when you press the middle button.
Thank you, councillors, for letting me talk to you this evening. I'm Dan Sumner. I live with my wife and my children at Tudor Cottage. As you will have seen on the planning pictures and the site layout, Tudor Cottage is one of a number of listed buildings in a very small area. And we are concerned as a family, but also in general, that if there was further development on that area, despite what the heritage statement has said, that there would be significant impact on the design and sort of the facade of all the different Grade 2 listed buildings. The proposed development is slap bang right in the middle of about 4 listed buildings, and Bolton-on-Chelsea, as far as I have read, is steeped in quite a significant amount of history, and it would be a significant shame to sort of disrupt the look of that little area. For those who haven't been to Green Lane, it is a sort of hybrid road, really. It's a mixture of what you would consider a country lane and a sort of busy road. And the portion of the development where there's access to the property actually comes out on a part of the road which has been narrowed. There is significant traffic down this road at the busy times of school time for the local primary school. So between 7 and sort of 8:30, and between 3 and 5. My concern with any further development in this area is that I've lost count of the number of occasions when I've heard people shouting at each other on the road because they've got into difficulty understanding the one-way system, but the traffic system. And adding more traffic and a blind turn into that area could make it more dangerous, especially as quite a significant amount of people walk their children to school from Old Lywood, which is at the top right of the planning, down towards the primary school. There are other significant effects on utilities. I'll try and keep it short, but there's quite a significant runoff from the farms locally, and also when it rains heavily, there's a lack of drainage in the local area. This was also cemented by my conversation with South Eastern Water, who said that the drainage in the area is particularly poor. So my concern is adding more houses to the same area is going to worsen the likelihood of sort of flooding. There is a small floodplain opposite my house, but there is significant water standing in the road. Overall, I feel that this would be a significant blight on a historical area of Bolton-on-Chelsea. But thank you for considering.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sumner. I'm sorry if I got your name wrong when I first called you up. I'm sorry about that. We now have a representative from Bolton Municipal Parish Council, Councillor Stuart Lane, who I think is with us virtually.
That's right.
Good. Okay, you have 3 minutes from when you start speaking.
Thank you. Firstly, we would like to reiterate our main objections to the application as follows. When considered with the 3 homes already consented on the site, the proposal represents an over-intensive form of development that jars with the spatial character of the immediate surrounding area, contrary to policies DM1 and DM11, and of the MBC local plan and policies within the NPPF. Since the previously consented applications were decided at appeal, the Bolton-on-Chelsea Neighbourhood Plan has come into effect, made in July 2021. The application fails to comply with NHP policies PWP3, PWP13 and RH1. The proposed 2 additional dwellings would have a detrimental effect on the setting of the 3 adjacent listed buildings and would alter the context within which they have sat for hundreds of years. We believe it is important to recognise that a listed building is the whole curtilage, not just the building itself, and therefore the setting is particularly important. We believe that the 3 existing listed buildings have great group value, reflecting a significant period in Bolton-on-Chelsea's history. The proposed new contemporary dwellings would be severely detrimental to this grouping of listed buildings, creating a cramped, overdeveloped site, especially when considered alongside the 3 previously consented dwellings. The planning statement makes a reference to Baltimore-on-Chelsea being a larger village. The document should have referred to emerging policy, which defines Baltimore-on-Chelsea as a smaller village. A further fact members should consider is that the location of the proposal is unsustainable. Baltimore-on-Chelsea has been downgraded from a larger village to a smaller village, and the evidence used to support this formed part of the MBC local plan review. There is virtually no bus service in the village, just a once-a-day grant-funded weekday service, which has been supported only until the end of the year. In terms of other services, Baltimore-on-Chelsea has a small post office and shop. However, the sorting office on the site recently relocated to Maidstone, decreasing the long-term viability of the shop. The village hairdressers has also closed down, and the building is currently being converted for residential use. Members should note that the Conservation Officer states that the proposal will cause less than substantial harm to the significance of surrounding listed buildings. It is noted that this harm needs to be weighed up against the public benefits of the proposal, one of which is stated as provision of windfall housing in a sustainable location. The location is not sustainable, therefore we disagree that any public benefit would result from this proposal. To conclude, Baltimore-on-Chelsea Parish Council urges members to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Councillor Lane, and nicely timed in your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now have Mr. Blythin from the applicant, so I know you've been here before, so you know what to do.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. This application seeks to make effective use of a sustainably located site within the village confines of Baltimore-on-Chelsea, in line with the Council's adopted and emerging local plan. Small sustainable developments such as this are essential in contributing to meeting the Council's housing requirements and the windfall allowance that's relied upon. It's recognised that the site lies in proximity to nearby listed buildings. However, the bespoke design proposed has been directly informed by an assessment of their setting and significance, utilising a traditional palette of materials and building form. The application site does not form part of the historic or original curtilage of Lewis Court, and no objections are raised by the Conservation Officer, which is consistent with recent appeal decisions following previous recommendations for approval on the wider site. The proposed density of development remains reflective of the village location and in keeping with local character, particularly when considering the prevailing form of development to the west and south, and the fact that the houses will only be readily visible from within the immediate site and not from wider public view. The layout delivers parking to standards and good levels of amenity for future occupiers, whilst avoiding any loss of privacy or overlooking to neighbouring residents. The scheme has incorporated new and additional native landscaping, including new habitat features, and no objections have been received from any technical consultee. In all respects, the officer's report provides a comprehensive assessment of the proposals and confirms that the application accords with policy, including the adopted neighbourhood plan. And just in response to the comments just from the parish direct members to the part of the committee report where there's a statement from the previous appeal decision that considers the past proposals against the neighbourhood plan that was adopted at the time of that appeal. The plans and proposals offer an appropriate and sympathetic design in a sustainable location within the village, and we therefore hope that members will be able to support the positive recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blythin. Councillor Mumford, the floor is yours. I'm sure you know what to do.
The 2017 plan relies on a sustainability assessment that puts Baltimore-on-Chelsea as a larger village. The audit of services was carried out in 2008. I'm suggesting we should be departing from the local plan, which you can do, paragraph 12, but only if a material consideration indicates that the plan should not be followed. Material consideration, sustainability. Baltimore-on-Chelsea has become an unsustainable location. This has been recognised by the new sustainability assessment within our local plan review. So that is the evidence. The new assessment and policies developed from it in general only allow developments within Bourton-on-Chelsea that are linked to the development or retention of services. I feel that this application should be assessed under the emerging policy SP8. Under that policy, all criteria must be met. I want to focus on three aspects. There is a planned-led development within SP8 that requires targets from all the smaller villages. This has been met and uniquely it's been allocated on site 360, 30 homes. So we move now on to the second part of SP8, which requires developers to fulfill all criteria. I will concentrate on two. This development cannot be linked to the retention or expansion of the specific infrastructure or service assets within the settlement. It fails that one. It has not got community support. This site is not allocated in the neighbourhood plan or has any other parish endorsement. The PC, through objecting to every application on the site, would also confirm this. I repeat, SP8 requires all criteria to be met, and this application fails on 2 of the 5 criteria. This is acknowledged by DHA in their correspondence to the planners. Harm to the heritage asset. The windfalls are not within a sustainable location. But while we're looking at this, you should also consider we have 170% delivery rate of 5-year housing land supply. Are the windfalls a public benefit? I believe that this should be decided under SP8, which it will be turned down under, and that the less than substantial harm is not offset by a public benefit. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Come back.
Thanks, Chairman. Admittedly on adjoining land and not on the site itself, but the councillor has lost, in straightforward terms, 2 appeals fairly recently. And inspectors will just look at, is Bourton-on-Chelsea sustainable or not? And they will not look at Bourton-on-Chelsea as an island. They look at proximity to Maidstone. Unless I'm mistaken, it's very close to one of the largest secondary schools in Maidstone Borough. I'm not saying it's got loads of facilities, the village itself, but it's got some, including a recreation ground. I think there's still a pub there. And there's some pubs nearby. So as things go, I think, to be frank, we'd be on a hide into nothing for the 3rd time on sustainability. I do get the, a line has to be drawn somewhere. To begin with, it was 2 houses, then have a nibble, get another house, now come back again, another 2 houses, I call it sort of squeezer site. But I'd say that the main question for councillors is that cramped development, which is significantly incongruous with the prevailing pattern of development, and that overlaps with the setting of the listed buildings. Obviously, we have recommended permission because we do not think that that does represent cramped development. But I think if the application is to be refused, and obviously we're recommending the contrary, that is your best bet in straightforward terms. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. Councillor English, you had your hand up first.
Councillor, Yes, Mr. Jarman is correct. I mean, given the appeal history on the neighbouring sites, and then, as he says, it's not the same site, the neighbouring sites, it would be quite difficult to run the sustainability argument. I do actually agree with Councillor Mumford to a certain extent. I don't think either the arguments against the application in terms of road traffic impact and sewage or the arguments for public benefit of a single house are particularly overwhelming. I think one can really set those aside on both sides. The issue is, I think, very much directly related to the form of the development itself, because if that is satisfactory, then the application should be approved. But as I said, the main reason that, as the officers have said, is that for sustaining a refusal would be, I think, the less than serious harm to the context and setting of the listed building. I think that's really about the only thing one could run. That's a question, and that's a very subjective question. Sometimes you win those, sometimes you don't. And it is a legitimate argument. I actually don't feel it's a particularly cramped form of development, but if members felt differently, we could perhaps run that. But personally, I don't feel that. I think it would just the only argument that could be used is the setting, the effect on the setting and context of the listed building.
Thank you, Councillor English. Does anyone else wish to speak on this item? Councillor Gooch and Councillor Berry. Yep.
Thank you, Chairman. I've really battled over this one. However, taking into account everything that I've just heard, I was concerned about the safety aspect and the access to these proposed to the proposed development. That access is narrow. Yes, the road is, I would say it's not safe. Unfortunately, the highways people would have no view at all. They would not consider any significant harm at all. In fact, significant isn't even qualified, and it would have to be to such an extent that the behaviour of traffic would have to permanently change for highways to come up with any kind of suggestion. So I feel that it's not a safe location. If I had children going to school, that's just not going to stand up. The access is very narrow when we get down to inside the site. And I'm wondering if the council is minded to, if committee is minded to approve, would there be any way that we could have an informative about the construction, the construction traffic, especially if it's wet and muddy and there's all that going in and out, and you've got the other residents trying to take kids to school or trying to go to work, whatever it is. I would really like to see some help if we are minded to. But I appreciate we couldn't put a condition on there because it's temporary. I appreciate that, but there must be something to do there. The harm to the other listed buildings, ooh, that really, I really took that on board. Unfortunately, I think it is a free country, and if somebody wants to put in a planning application, unless we've got really, really strong grounds to prove that the harm is really substantial, then I think we're on a hiding to nothing. And I'm afraid so far, as much as I would love to refuse this, I'm not convinced of any strong grounds for refusal that we could get away with at appeal. As much as I'm trying to consider this on its own merits and listen to the objections, I'm struggling, but certainly an informative would cheer me up a bit, frankly.
Thank you, Councillor Gooch. I mean, I don't see why we can't have a condition requiring a construction management plan, but yeah. I'll put that over to.
Yeah, as you said, Chairman, it's quite a standard condition, a construction management plan, you know, particularly given that it's quite a tight site, so it's very close to other people's properties. So there's, you know, a high risk of nuisance being caused to residents. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I I totally agree with what Councillor Gooch has just said, actually. But I just have a question on this, because I think Mr. Jarman's words were hiding to nothing were probably right, actually. So, but what is the status of the neighbourhood plan of Malton and Montmorency? Because it's been mentioned by the parish council. I think it was mentioned by Councillor Mumford, and it seems to me that this is it's more recent than the some of the original decisions here. So I'd just like to know how this fits in, because clearly it's not in the neighbourhood plan, and I would have thought that had some meaning. Thank you. If not, I understand that.
We may answer in stereo, but one of the fundamentals of neighbourhood plans, I think you're aware of this, John, with your own neighbourhood plan, is that neighbourhood plans can only look at certain matters. They cannot look at strategic matters. And one classic strategic matter is the boundaries. For instance, the town of Maidstone, in this case, the village envelope of Bolton and Chelsea. Those strategic matters, because the adopted local plan splits strategic matters, or strategic policies, I should say, from development management issues. So it is only the local plan who can set, village boundaries and things. And the local plan, even though the neighbourhood plan is more recent, Diane might want to come back on that, sets it out as this site is within the village envelope.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, we've had a number of applications in this part of Green Lane over the years, and I do concur, I think, on every level with the parish council. I think as you head east along Green Lane, this is the transition point. It's where on one side of the road it's more rural, and it's where you're going into a more rural area away from the village centre. And that's why I am concerned at the continuing intensification of this site. I remember right back when we had the initial applications for the two dwellings, there was a lot of debate around the impact on the listed building and around the impact on, if you like, the gateway to the built up area of the village. And I am just concerned that it's getting a little bit shades of Grove Green, or even worse, shades of the A274 at Sutton Valence, which is horrendous now, with red brick walls and urban houses along basically a rural road. And I just cannot believe that happened. But I don't want the rot to occur here as well. And I am minded to support the parish council that this has gone just too far, that the two additional dwellings is the straw that breaks the camel's back in terms of the setting of that section of the street scene. And I think it is possible to put together an argument that with the listed building, with the urban edge, or kind of village edge location, that there should be a less intensive grain to the development, and that this is just too much, and that basically gaps are being found and filled in. And just coming back to that point around the design, when we initiated this, I think the first smaller dwelling to be built was quite cottagey. The second dwelling was a bit bigger. Both of these are big. Both of these, frankly, I think are out of keeping. So even if we do permit, I do wonder whether this is good and appropriate design, and whether, if you like, that kind of more kind of cottage, smaller unit that's already there is more appropriate, because I think this is, as I'm going to say, it's have shades of the A274 at Sutton Valence. But I'd like to hear, the planners' thoughts on this, on not just the intensification, but also the design, and whether the design is exacerbating that intensity.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Difficult issues there. I mean, I think this is a proposal that none of us are practically easy with, but it's very, very difficult to think of reasons for refusal. but we could perhaps try and negotiate a better scheme if that might be acceptable. But I'd like to hear what the officers have to say.
William or Diane can articulate it probably better than me, but it's a difficult one, isn't it? Obviously, two inspectors have looked at the issue of cramped development, intensification, how valuable this site is, or this little bit of Bolton and Chelsea, in terms of, is it a transition site? And obviously to date, they've just said it has all been acceptable, but obviously this is, I am conscious this is 2 more houses. And some of this sounds contradictory, but the appeal decisions, and there has been obviously 2 of them, are strong material considerations given that they're relatively recent. And because, trying to think, be more articulate, but because we've lost them so convincingly, I'm skeptical that these 2, you know, arguably large houses are the straws that break the camel's back. Do you want to add to that?
Councillor Jeffrey, perhaps you can come up with something that will help us take this forward.
Oh, I wish. I must say, it is my mind has swayed backwards and forwards through the discussion, so it's quite an interesting one. And I am quite concerned about the intensification, but the advice of that we're probably going to lose on appeal does rather push me in one direction. Can I though ask, if we do pass this, can I have a quick look at the conditions that were suggested? And I'm afraid one of those conditions is ragstone. But when I looked at the listed buildings, I didn't see any ragstone around it. So maybe, you know how much I hate ragstone, or I love it, but I don't like it coming out of the ground. Does this need ragstone? Firstly, to fit in with the listed buildings around it, and secondly, you know, there's something about the roof finish here, but you've got a condition on low carbon sources of energy. Now, how does that relate to putting solar panels on top? Can we be a little bit more specific about that if we do agree this?
Yeah, so I keep coming back. I'm sure Councillor Munford would correct me if I've got this wrong, but I'm pretty sure that the quarries and other areas were ragstone quarries. So you can't get this is sort of like ragstone HQ. And obviously inspectors have taken that into account. You know, it's a strong material consideration, impact on the setting of listed buildings which are right next door to them. So obviously we try to get traditional materials, I think the agent called it. Yes, so it'd be very difficult. Take the point that we're in 2024. What a lot of developers are doing now in terms of you know, energy efficiency, micro generation of energy, is using air source heat pumps. We could I would have thought we could put a condition on requiring that. It's highly likely to feature in the future home standard as well. So it's a bit lengthy answer.
We have pulled up a photo here of Lewis Court, and we do think there is a ragstone plinth before you get to the brick on the ground floor. So I think that's where the ragstone element has come from, and also it was a material that the conservation officer was happy with. I can just briefly show you the design of one of the dwellings on one of the previously approved schemes. Is that shared? Just so they were of quite some similar size to what is proposed on this scheme, slightly different design with a larger double garage. The garage proposed on plot 2 for this proposal is actually a smaller carport, so I would say actually the scale of the proposed dwellings for this scheme is slightly smaller than the approved dwellings. These are the 2 dwellings to the rear of Lewis Court Cottage to the east. This was the 2016 scheme. So it gives you an idea of the type of scale proposed. Also, the inspector in the previous appeal did comment about visual gap being an important issue, but he felt that there was space around the buildings, and actually there's more space around Lewis Court than there is actually left remaining around Lewis Court Cottage. And we felt that considering the gaps between the proposal and Lewis Court, there's actually a visual gap left around the whole of that listed building, and views from Green Lane are left uninterrupted. So when you're viewing it from Green Lane, you're seeing Lewis Court still remaining in a visual envelope. So that's the assessment that's been undertaken looking back at those previous appeal decisions. So hopefully that gives you sort of some help as to the background we've been looking at.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on this? Councillor Cox?
It's a question really before I'm any more happy than I'm unhappy at the moment. Are we taking the context of all of the listed buildings forming a group, or do we have to only say in relation to that one, there's enough space between the proposal, or are we looking at them as they were perhaps built within a period of maybe 150 years? So it is a combination. Because as you come along Green Lane, you have Cleves, Tudor Cottage, Lewis Court, White Cottage, and then I believe they were council houses. Now those are close together, but that is what that part of the street scene is. The lake that appears in front of it at Green Lane regularly, because KCC aren't emptying the silt traps, is another problem. But to me, it is detrimental, and there would be an adverse effect on the group of Grade 2 listed buildings and the setting that they now provide if we were to put this development in the space that's been there. It hasn't been previous houses that have been knocked down or garages or anything like that. There was a space there. Might have been an orchard, but I just think that it's too much. As we've had straw that's broke the camel's back. Those were the words that I had to say that I didn't think it was correct, but I don't know if they're any help.
The officers want to come back on that?
I guess I'm repeating myself in that, you know, obviously 2 inspectors have looked at the issue of impact on the group of listed buildings, but they will have had to have a look at all buildings. And 2 government inspectors have come to the conclusion that the impact on the prevailing character, form, layout of the area, and in that context, we give precedence to the listed
Can I interrupt you just for a moment? Councillor Harwood, could you come back? Sorry, you shouldn't be conversing with the visiting member. Sorry. Sorry to have interrupted you, John.
So, you know, sorry, I'll start again. Sorry. So one could say this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. So what's the harm being caused? We'd have to say it's cramped, but we couldn't just say it's cramped in isolation. We would have to say it's incongruous with the prevailing character and form and layout of housing in this area, particularly the listed buildings. But, a big but in capital letters, 2 inspectors have not found that to be the case. And I do think it is important which Councillor Perry picked up on, it is within the village envelope. And sorry to be straightforward, obviously you wouldn't have any growth in housing or very little growth if there wasn't space to fill up with housing. And I'll say much more than that, really.
Thank you, Mr. John. Councillor English and then Councillor Cox.
If it wasn't for the fact that two inspectors already looked at that argument and essentially said no, so we are simply hanging the argument on, hoping that the third time around, because there's an additional element, we'll actually win the argument. I have to say I'm sceptical. However, it just comes down to a decision whether members actually think that that's worth doing. I'm sceptical as to whether we win that argument. It is, however, a legitimate argument, so I don't think we'd get a cost award against us, but I'm not optimistic of winning.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Cox, want to come back?
So in which case, if we're considering the south side of Green Lane, what's stopping then, if this was permitted, them starting to infill the other side, in other words, Lywood House, and those to the north? Because there are spaces in between those, and you could say that the rhythm of that side of the street is set back. So why can't we start infilling over there? We have, if you move east, we now have a new development over that right-hand side. And where is it going to be not acceptable? And we should be saying, hold on, that's just too much.
That's obviously a difficult question, and I did, I was at pains to say I'm not relying solely on previous appeal decisions because they're not on this site. But if it's on the northern side of Green Lane, then that would be outside of the village boundary. And as it currently stands, I don't want to get into arguments about what the local plan review says, but today, the test under SP17 would be harm. And I think I'd be right in saying we would, as officers, we would recommend that for refusal, and we would refuse under delegated powers.
Wait, Mr. Chairman, can we move to a conclusion, because we're going back and forward pretty much around the same point?
Councillor Gooch.
Thank you. If we did go for refusal, so far we've only had one ground, and that's the one. I know that's all you need, but I'm feeling nervous from previous appeals and committee meetings and whatever. Somewhere I've heard that it's better to have two grounds rather than pin all your hopes on just one.
I disagree. May I respectfully disagree? It's quite possible that we would lose a refusal on the listed building ground. However, I do think it's a legitimate ground to use. If we put more grounds in just because we're not comfortable on having just the one ground, although perhaps we could talk about the form of the development, that would be legitimate if we could sustain that. If we put in, say, I don't know, a highway ground or whatever, we could still win, but we might get a cost award put against us for putting in a ground that we couldn't substantiate. So if we put in grounds that we don't think will fly, we could still win the appeal, get the application still refused, and still have a cost award against us because we put in a ground we shouldn't have, if you see what I mean. So one good ground, or at least a ground that we're not going to get turned over for a large amount of, for being silly, is probably better. I mean, I think that there's just about enough to say that we could defend, or at least argue. I'm not saying we defend it, but we could at least argue the listed building point.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Chairman. We need to end this now, move to the vote. I've listened to what everybody's said on it. I was like lots of my colleagues going one way, then going back again. One good ground is enough grounds, but I'm not entirely sure we've got one good ground, given the previous appeal decisions. The one in referenced on the 16/508/513 was partial award of costs to the appellant. I don't really see that we've got anything particularly that we can sustain here. So I'm going to propose that we grant planning permission.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. We are sort of going round in circles to a certain extent, and we know it is now make your mind up time, folks. As a local planning authority, we either have to refuse this, allow it, or defer it. We've had a good debate. I think this is a development which none of us particularly are happy with, but I don't think there are, my personal view is I don't think there are any strong reasons for refusal. And I think if we did refuse, we will be in dire danger of losing the appeal. I mean, that is my personal view. Other members might think separately. Councillor Russell has proposed that we permit as per the order papers. I think that should be done in addition with a, sorry, Councillor Perry?
I'm happy to second.
Oh, you took the words from my mouth. I was just about to do that myself. Yes, I was going to say traffic and a construction management plan.
Plus the air source heat pumps.
Plus the air source heat pumps. So you're happy with that, Councillor Russell? Happy with that, Councillor Perry? Okay, so I'm quite happy for you to be the seconder. You're quite happy to be the seconder, yes? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, great stuff. Okay, unless anybody else wants to say anything else, we'll put it to the vote, and votes in favour. Thank you. Votes against. It is carried, members. Thank you very much. Interesting debate. Sometimes we have to let our heads rule our hearts on these things, I'm afraid. Thank you for attending, Councillor Mumford, and right, we now come on to item 15 on the agenda, page 32 on your order papers, Cliff House, Cliff Hill, Bolton Monchelsea, yet again. And Ms. Chaplin, the floor is yours.
This application does relate to Cliff House. It's a retrospective application for change of use of land to garden land and the erection of one outbuilding to house a home gym, decking, patio and hot tub. The site is located in open countryside. The proposal now only includes a strip of land for the change of use that contains the outbuilding and a small area surrounding it. The original curtilage that was included in a previous application included the original curtilage of Cliff House, but also this area here was part of the red line for the change of use. That application was dismissed at appeal. So you'll see now the area is a much smaller area rather than the whole of this area. This is the plans for the building. The building is already there. As I say, it's a retrospective proposal. It is now proposed to reduce the area of patio to the front of the building, which can be ensured by the use of condition. These are some aerial photographs going from 1990, 2003, This is the area of land owned by the applicant. This is the dwelling. This site is down here. Up to the current day, where you can see the outbuilding at the bottom of the site. This is the actual building. I would point out that although this proposal was dismissed at appeal, the inspector focused the refusal on the extent of land associated with the change of use, and that it was not possible to separate the outbuilding from the change of use. The inspector actually concluded that the outbuilding was of appropriate design, siting and scale, and well sited in connection to the main dwelling, and that it did not compete visually with the dwelling or cause harm to the character and appearance of the area. He concluded that there was no conflict with policy DM32. As I say, the proposal this time reduces the area of land associated with the change of use. It also reduces the amount of hard standing to the front. The inspector was particularly focused on the land to the north, which provides a clear separation of Baltimore-on-Chelsea from the larger urban area of Maidstone. This proposal and the amendment seek to address that. The change of use of the larger area's land was considered contrary to policy DM30 and also on the basis of the loss of the best and most versatile of agricultural land. So that was a reason for refusal that he upheld. However, again, the area of land has been much reduced, and so the loss of agricultural land is now minimal. It's considered that the proposal has now addressed all the issues raised by the inspector. These are some more pictures of the outbuilding, the hot tub and decking to the side, the existing outbuildings. This is the area of land, the boundary treatment to the rear. And this is the land in front that was previously subject to the change of use, but has now been excluded from the proposal. This is looking across from the blue land down to the dwelling. This is obviously an earlier photo before the building was completed. Overall, we do recommend permission be granted subject to the various conditions we've imposed, including landscaping, biodiversity, lighting, and removal of permitted development rights relating to any Class E and Class F, such as additional outbuildings or hard standing on the area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two speakers. We have Councillor Stuart Lane again from Bolton-Monchelsea, who is with us visually. Can you hear us?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, the floor is yours. You have another 3 minutes.
Thank you. So firstly, we would like to reiterate our main objections to the application as follows. The building is detrimental to the setting of the adjacent listed building. The building is intended to be ancillary, yet is unreasonably remote from the existing dwelling. The scale of the building is disproportionate and is highly visible from the surrounding countryside. The proposal is not within the Baltimore-on-Chelsea village development boundary and therefore fails to comply with neighbourhood plan policies PWP4 and RH1. This large block of a building detracts from the open character of the area and therefore fails to comply with neighbourhood policy plan policy PWP5. The proposal does not fit well within its context and harms neighbours' amenity in terms of its proximity to adjacent residential gardens at the bottom of the cliff face. It therefore fails to comply with neighbourhood plan policy RH7. Members should also note that this application should be considered a greenfield site and not compared to a previous refused application. The proposal includes change of use of approximately 200 square metres of land from agricultural to garden land. It has already been established that this land is considered to be best and most versatile agricultural land. The application therefore fails to comply with policy DM33, which resists change of use of this type of land. If the application were approved, it would completely undermine this policy. Members should consider that this large outbuilding could easily have been constructed on the sizable plot of existing garden land surrounding the main house. there was no need whatsoever to encroach onto agricultural land. It should also be noted that there has already been a build-up of domestic paraphernalia external to the proposal, with items including a boat, quad bikes and tarpaulins. It should be noted that this development has already been refused by Maidstone Borough Council and dismissed at appeal. To now change the boundary to convert quality agricultural land to an extended garden, however small that garden extension may be, and for MBC to find that acceptable conflicts with policy and makes a total mockery of the planning system. To conclude, Bolton-on-Chelsea Parish Council urges members to refuse this retrospective application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lane. Thank you. And we come back to Councillor Mumford. Wake up.
I'll be very quick with this. Second retrospective application as a result of enforcement action related to a planning breach. That's what this is. We got DM 33 and we know that we will grant permission as long as the applications don't harm the appearance of the countryside or the loss of best, most versatile agricultural land, which is the higher one. I understand the committee probably not having an appetite to refuse this on harm to the character and of the countryside. What is evident by the reports that this has not been viewed from Walt Meadow. Walt Meadow is the adjacent biodiversity project and it is very visible from there. However, based on the inspector's report, I could see there would be no appetite to pursue that. But the inspector does support you on your last refusal to do with the most versatile agricultural land and the incursion. I can't see anywhere in any of the reports or on the policy the magnitude of the incursion. The policy has been reviewed along with all of our other policies as part of the local plan review. We're pushing it forward. It has been supported by inspectors. So I do not know why you are being asked by the officers to undermine one of our policies by looking at one bad application against an even worse one. I don't see why we should be comparing two bad ones. I would ask, and I think Councillor Haas would take this forward for me because he knows the site. That is in the middle of what we call a wildlife corridor that feeds Walt Meadow. Walt Meadow is a 25-year biodiversity project. We would ask that the landscaping includes landscaping immediately to the north of the building and to the west, that any lighting allowed is low level, that we include owl boxes, not only bird boxes, and some way to stop the domestic rubbish to the west of the site. I would ask that we look at those in conditions if you are going to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mumford. Right, I'll open the discussion to the floor. Councillor Jeffrey.
Okay, I'll go first then. I must say I am persuaded that this loss of best and most versatile agricultural land is quite important, and the fact that it does move outside of the village boundary does for me say quite a lot. And I disagree with the inspector about this building not being visually problematic. I mean, it looks from the photographs like it still is. So I think this should be refused on the best and most versatile grounds, because we really do not want to lose agricultural land.
Councillor English.
I don't like the building either, but I don't really think I can really go back over that, unfortunately. But I don't like it. But my not liking something is possibly less important than an inspector's view. I read through the appeal decision with interest. As the officer said, the inspector does mention extent of the application for upholding the refusal quite a lot. What he doesn't do, she doesn't do, is define what would be an acceptable extent, which unfortunately would have been rather helpful, I have to say. In terms of there still being room for a considerable amount of domestic clutter and paraphernalia, I would say that the existing, although the harm would be reduced considerably, possibly, there is still, I think, considerable scope for domestic clutter and paraphernalia in the remaining 200 square metres. That's by most people's accounting quite a lot of land, and so there's still quite a lot of scope for that sort of thing occurring, which was essentially the grounds for driving that part of the upholding of the refusal. And whilst it's a lot less agricultural land, it is still agricultural land, so there is an issue of principle. So really, at the end of the day, I think you could argue this both ways. That it is a substantially less bad application than the one we had before, but is less bad good enough in our planning system? Shouldn't we be saying that actually we want good planning applications, not just less bad ones? So I do think that it does. There are still principles being breached by this application if it were to be approved, and there would still be negative impacts from domestic paraphernalia potentially on quite a large scale. So I do think, and also I do think we need to take consistency of decision making into account, because if we permit this, other people are going to say, we can have 200 square metres of open countryside or agricultural land outside the village envelope too. So by the time you've added up lots of 200 square metres, you haven't got much countryside left. It's all been turned into, or agricultural land, it's all been turned into people's domestic gardens, because, it's not as bad as the previous application. So I actually do think there are issues of principle involved as well.
Yes, it's every case on its merits, isn't it, Councillor English? And reading the inspector's report, he or she was a little bit ambiguous, wasn't she? I mean, it was about, she obviously very, very concerned about the loss of the best and most versatile agricultural land, but then not very, very clear really about the impact of the building. And it makes a very, very difficult decision for us. Councillor Russell?
I just wanted to ask a question, if I could. So in the inspector's decision, she mentions that whilst the appeal site's currently in private ownership, not available for productive agricultural use, the site could feasibly be owned and accessed separately. And that was with regard to the bigger area, which was 2,700 metres squared.
Yeah.
So that could be farmed. This is 200 metres squared, which is 0.04 of an acre. So I suppose my question is, would that still stand up, or do we not have size limits on that? What's the officer's feeling? Thank you.
I've never heard a threshold figure, but I'll ask the officers.
I mean, I don't think I've ever seen a particular size limit on what sort of land could be farmed. I think the only thing you can look at is the pictures here, that a lot of farmland isn't farmed close to boundaries. You're at the top of a slope. Boundaries of crops tend to be pulled in slightly, I'm sure, on a drop of land. Farmers who are grazing animals tend to pull in the fences. So you could only assume that they wouldn't be farming right up to the boundaries, but there's no set answer on that ground. What I would point out is that the inspector had every opportunity to refuse the proposal for the outbuilding, but he did find that acceptable. It's quite sort of clear in his report. The issues raised about it being remote, its scale, not linked to the dwelling, he actually found the opposite, concluded the opposite on all of those issues. But that he could have, or she could have, made a far more comprehensive decision if she felt the outbuilding was unacceptable. But even if she felt that change of use of the land and what it was cited, but it was purely focused on the change of use. I would say, as you read it, I concluded quite clearly, really, that it's the change of use of the land to the north, not the area in which the outbuilding is cited. Else the opportunity was there to refuse the whole thing, whereas it's been worded very differently from that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened to the debate with interest, but I'm just coming back to the policy. The DM33 is clear that you should not have essentially residential accoutrements built in the open countryside, and it's nowhere near the house. It's plonked at the edge of a field on land that falls down towards the cliff edge. I understand that the inspector has made some statements which seems quite fudged to me, but I still don't understand why you would put this building so far away from the dwelling house at the edge of a sheep field. And I think it is contrary to DM33, regardless of what the inspector says. So I take quite a purist approach to this, is that if you want to build a gym, a shed or whatever, you don't build it in the field next to you, you build it in your garden. And that seems to be quite a fundamental point of principle for planning, to my mind. And I quite like to test it on this building because I do think it's intrusive. I do think it's urbanising, and it's on agricultural land.
I would second that if that's a motion to refuse, because I think it needs testing.
Thank you, Councillor English. Do you want to come back?
We have got paragraph 12 of the inspector's decision. He does say, although the outbuilding is outside the established garden, it is not far from the host dwelling and adjoins the boundary with the neighbouring dwellings in the quarries. Notwithstanding its substantial footprint, it does not compete visually with the host dwelling due to its clearly subordinate height and design. In paragraph 18, I found the outbuilding is not in itself harmful to the character and appearance of the area due to its siting, design and scale. We have got to bear those factors in mind, and be very careful if you are going to refuse. Be very careful how you refuse, because you would open yourselves up to costs.
I think
I'd come back on that. Sorry,
weigh a policy higher than an inspector's conclusion.
All I'm saying is it's not the outbuilding. It remains the issue that even on a diminished site there would be significant clutter, paraphernalia. So regardless of whether the inspector's comments that the outbuilding itself is acceptable, reducing the footprint of the site does not remove the reasons that drove the inspector to uphold the original refusal, because the domestic paraphernalia and all the other clutter would still be there.
The activity.
And the activity associated with it. So I'm not resting it on the outbuilding itself, because I'm very, very clear in what the inspector said about the outbuilding. I don't agree, but she said it. So that's so it's the associated activity, not the building itself. Can I be clear about that?
Councillor Cummins.
Thank you, Chair. I remember when this came last time, and it was DM33 that we refused it on. And when I read the inspector's report, it was more about the footprint of it, and I thought, oh, maybe they've made the building smaller, and it's exactly the same building. They've just took the patio away. You know, to me, that's not acceptable. And I must admit, I agree with Councillor English and Councillor Harwood, and I'm quite happy to refuse this application.
So We will refuse it on the basis of the effects on the local landscape, and it's not just the building itself, but also the domestic paraphernalia to go with it. We've already been talking about controlling low level lighting, so there's all sorts of things that could happen there. Can I ask the officers if they'd like to come back on that?
In terms of low-level lighting, that's obviously something that can be controlled by condition. We have suggested imposition of conditions restricting PD rights, so no outbuildings, hard standing, etc. Obviously, we can't restrict domestic paraphernalia, but I'm not sure that was previously a reason for refusal. I am just currently checking that to see if there's any grounds on domestic paraphernalia, but if it's not been previously raised as a reason for refusal, that could be problematic, but I'm just reading through to double check that.
Okay, I think it's clear that members seem to be moving towards wanting to refuse this, but unless anybody else wants to speak on it, I'll ask the officers to give that some consideration. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you. Can I, something that Councillor Montford was saying about the wildlife corridor, I don't think we've heard enough about the biodiversity side. I'm not sure. I haven't got enough knowledge about our policies. I'm just wondering if I could supplement what Councillor English is going on, because I really feel as if I want to refuse this, but I'm struggling as to how we do it. But I just thought to mention some of the stuff that Councillor Montford mentioned.
Obviously, we as officers disagree, but my understanding is that some councillors are cognizant of what the inspector said, obviously, because it's an appendix. But some councillors still think that this represents a significant extension of the domestic curtilage into the open countryside and therefore can't agree to policy DM 33.
I think those of us who were objecting were taking on board the inspector's comments. It wasn't the building itself, you know. So we're not trying to be, you know, achieve. Yeah, but it's the associated use stuff with it, and the fact that, you know, there isn't a threshold on the agricultural land conversion. It doesn't say that you can do it because it's a small amount.
Thank you, Councillor English. Do you have a suitable reason for refusal, or would you like the officers to draft something?
I think I'm saying, as I said before, despite the substantial reduction in size, there is still a considerable amount of domestication of what is open countryside going to happen, harm to the landscape, not so much from the building itself, but from the associated activity, paraphernalia it's going on. And as I said, there is nothing, as I'm aware of, in policy that says you can allow the conversion of agricultural land just because it's a little bit of agricultural land. It's still contrary to policy. There's no threshold.
Based on its merits, isn't it? I've never seen a threshold. Right. Anybody else want to speak on this? So we have a potential reason for refusal, which is based upon DM 33, and it's the impact. Yes. Okay. Are members happy with that?
Just to add to that, we've talked about very kind of practical impacts. I think something fundamental here is the impact on the character of the open countryside and all of the activities that have been described before. It just will change the feel of the countryside and undermine it and lead to harm. And I think that's what, you know, I think we should give perhaps dedicated powers for the detailed wording to be framed by the officers precisely. But it's just that change in character and feel is undermined by, you know, a relatively small change of use and development, but strategically it has quite a big impact.
I think the officers certainly had the gist of what we're all talking about now, so I'll be happy to give them delegating powers to devise those reasons for refusal. Everybody happy with that? Okay, in that case, then we will take a vote to refuse the application as per the grounds of refusal to be drafted by the officers. Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Don't think there are. Right, thank you, members. Right. Oh, just got the appeals.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Little Bennett's. Right, members, now on to the last item on the agenda, item 17, which is the appeal decisions. I'll ask Mr. Jarman to give us his comments.
Yeah, just briefly, all delegated decisions, and it was 50-50 in terms of results, as I say. It's quite pertinent, really, to the discussion on the first item at Bolton and Chelsea, in that it is disappointing that we lost an appeal outside Headcorn. Since time immemorial, and I'm sure you, Chairman, will remember this, the old Kent structure planning and indeed the Maidstone local plan used to only allow for the conversion of agricultural buildings of sort of architectural or historic quality, such as Kentish Oast houses, Tithe barns, that sort of thing. But an inspector has now allowed the demolition of an agricultural building, something we've fought against for ages. We talked about, rightly or wrongly, whether or not Bolton and Chelsea was sustainable, but here we go, an inspector saying Tattlebury Lane is sustainable. So I don't really know what to say, actually. Apart from hopefully with a February adjourned meeting, we'll finally be able to have a discussion on SP17 and all these kind of decisions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Jarman. Is Councillor English?
I don't know whether people are aware of the case that was brought by residents of a council estate, a former council estate in Southwark, against Southwark Council on the issue of making substantial changes to planning applications through non-material amendments. Southwark Council lost that case. I just wonder whether it's worth our team having a look at whether there are any implications to be drawn from that court decision, because we have in the past suffered, I think, in this borough from significant changes made to planning applications from non-material amendments which never came before members and didn't get much scrutiny by officers. It may be germane. I'm not asking you to rush into it, but in your own good time, because it may be useful for us to draw any relevant lessons out of that.
Yes, sorry, I'll be quick. Yeah, I do need to read that, because one cannot appeal against a non-material amendment refusal, so I don't understand that unless there's something very special about that case. What we've found on loads of developments which have been approved in this chamber is developers, after getting planning permission, applying for what are called Section 73 applications, to be straightforward about it, to dilute the conditions that we put on. And inspectors, unfortunately, you know, this very tactical. They kind of isolate parts of the planning permission and sort of say, oh, sorry, Stuart, we're not going to use Ragstone on these few properties. It doesn't really matter. And unfortunately, they do tend to win because they're trying to just isolate separate pieces. And we have had legal advice. And if one has a very comprehensive description of what is being permitted, then you can't go down this salami slicing route. I will look into that, Clive, the appeal you mentioned.
Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Chairman. Not precisely linked to the appeal decisions, but I think it has a bearing on some of it. There's been quite a lot of correspondence going on amongst with the chairman involved and Mr. Jarman and so on about recent experience in some rural, urban and peri-urban areas where significant amounts of landscaping and big trees have been removed. Then a planning application has come in and officers have not conditioned any landscaping condition to put back what has been taken out, and they all of those decisions were under delegated, but it just seemed, you know, not rocket science that if you take a row of trees out, like the lime trees at Clyde Emerson's, for example, that you would want them put back and you wouldn't allow just a massive car park covering the whole thing. But it's not happening. Mr. Jarman has explained that the policy framework is no longer very strong when it comes to landscaping in Maidstone Borough, and that we need some sort of a DPD or an SPD, and we need to get this plugged, because otherwise we're going to see just a gradual diminution of the quality of the landscape, urban and rural.
Yeah, I mean, quite rightly, there's a dichotomy, isn't there, if you don't mind me saying it, between councillors probably quite rightly wish to have biodiversity enhancement conditions placed on extensions, renewables, that sort of thing on extensions. We do that routinely. And the reason for that is because we have an SPD on residential extensions that explicitly say that. All I'm saying is we need the same for landscape. And we've got a policy to hang it off, so that there's no problem there. So it's a matter of a detailed SPD.
So it's a reference to the cabinet member to look at it as a priority, because it's having quite a big negative impact, the fact that it's not being considered, maybe.
Absolutely. Yes, we can do that. In fact, we do now have a specific officer in place whose job is actually to go out and chase up landscaping schemes, and he seems to be going about it quite well. As far as
Councillor Howard has
yeah,
been in
yeah,
regular
sure.
correspondence with Ben Barrett.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay. Sorry, do we? Yeah, well, we could do that, couldn't we? Yes. Yeah. So do the committee agree that we make a reference to the cabinet member for that to be investigated? Yes, agreed. Right, thank you very much, members. Fine, thank you. Right, unless anybody else has anything else to say about the appeals or anything else to do with planning, I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much for your patience and understanding.
I was just about to be certain on those things.
Well, yeah.